Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Rise Above Justice Movement podcast. My name is Zachary Mallory, and I am the founder of the Rise Above Justice Movement, which is a national grassroots movement of survivors and allies coming together to battle and to eradicate sexual and gender-based violence. Today, I want to give a viewer discretion is advised because the topics that we will be talking about can be triggering to some audiences. Again, viewer discretion is advised. We will be talking with Lindsey Boylan, who is a former advisor to the former disgraced governor, Andrew Cuomo, and I will also be joined with one of my co-founders, Gwen Levy. Gwen Levy in the breakdown. Be sure to stream Lighter on all streaming platforms now. So, without further ado, I would like to bring Lindsey on. So, good morning, Lindsey. I'm so excited to sit down and talk with you. Share your story, amplify, the work that you're doing now, but also about where you came from and where you are now. We are so incredibly honored to sit down and talk with you. So I would love for you to introduce yourself to anybody who is listening, who may not know who you are. Feel free to do a deep dive into who Lindsey is.
Sure. Well, I'm so excited to be here. So thank you so much for having me. I really value being in community, and I'm excited to be here. So I'm Lindsey Boylan. I've spent the majority, if not all of my career in and around politics. I grew up originally in San Diego, but I came to New York right after college, and I knew, and I always had this passion for politics as a way to help people and make their lives better. I started in urban planning, primarily in parks and public spaces for people. Ultimately, as you mentioned, I worked in state government as the Secretary for Economic Development and Housing. I'm special advisor to the governor, which means I was the jobs and housing person for Andrew Cuomo at the end of my term. And, that was the realization of a lot of hard work over my career. And so half of it was incredibly important, and the work itself and the people I got to work with and community were wonderful. And then the other half of the job was really terrible because I was, like far too many women working in and around Andrew Cuomo's orbit, sexually harassed. Ultimately, I was the first woman to come forward about my experience publicly because a young woman reached out to me confidentially and told me that something very similar had happened to her. And I felt that I had to speak up because, candidly, I felt responsible for what had happened to her because I didn't speak up sooner and stop it before she had a job working for this abuser. And so the last few years have been quite the unexpected experience, continuing to fight this monster and his legal abuse in court through his taxpayer-funded abuse. And even though I'm not suing him, I'm still a potential party to all of the cases of women who have brought litigation against him. And now, as he continues his run for mayor, I was very much involved with the anti-Cuomo campaign in the primary, and I was very proud of that work alongside so many others. And the work continues because we're going to make sure that he is not the mayor of New York City. He's not the mayor of my 11-year-old daughter or any other woman or any other survivor in this city.
Absolutely. Lindsey, thank you so much, for the work that you do, the work that you will continue to do. And, obviously, we're always here for you and to continue collaborating with you because we absolutely love you. We absolutely love your content. I remember the first time that you came forward, or, whenever you initially came forward, I remember that story breaking the headlines because it did.
Yeah.
And if you remember, and I know you remember this very well, and my partner, Amelia, who is, for those who are listening, is my co-host of this podcast. She's unavailable today. She's doing some brake repair on our car, so she's unavailable to attend today. But essentially, Lindsey, I want to know your thoughts about this because after you came forward and other women started to join you, there was a group that started the term Cuomo-sexual. Do you remember
Yeah.
that?
Oh, I remember it vividly.
So walk us through your thoughts about that. And then I know you've also worked alongside Cynthia Nixon, which I grew up watching Sex in the City, so I absolutely love her. But walk us through, just What's your thoughts about that?
Yeah.
Because, women come forward and, they talk about the abuse that they face. And then you see this other group of, and I believe it was actually another group of women,
Yes.
surprisingly, that started the
Yes.
term Cuomo. And then Cynthia kind of adapted to where she said, vote the homo no Cuomo or something like that. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
so
Yes.
walk us through just what your reaction was to that. Walk us through um, yeah, just walk us
Sure.
through like your initial reactions, and then we'll kickstart over to Gwen, and she'll have some other questions for you. All right.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, unfortunately, it is not a unique experience to be kind of heartbroken by some of the public reception when a survivor comes forward. And so I'm no different in that way. And I wasn't really surprised because Andrew Cuomo, if nothing else, is a master at kind of putting fear in people and building off of their hate. And so I'm not really surprised that this group kind of attracted around him this cult of personality. As an aside, I didn't explain this in my opening, but I went to a women's college. I went to Wellesley. I grew up surrounded by primarily women. Most of my best friends are women. I'm raising a daughter. And I have always really cherished being a feminist and focusing on women. And so I think even if I wasn't entirely surprised by this small group of women that, branded themselves homosexuals and spent and continue to spend their entire free time smearing me and other survivors on his behalf, it was still really painful because it's so the antithesis of, what gives meaning to my life and what I felt like I was trying to achieve by coming forward. I really wanted to help other women and felt like I had a responsibility to do so if I really cared. And so to see a group of women, largely in this case, like of my mom's generation, so women who could be my mother, doing this was incredibly devastating. I think the longer, and I'm pretty open about this, I do trauma therapy. It's something that I've talked about over the years because it has been, oddly enough, many years now since all of this started. um, it's kind of sad for them, and oftentimes when you see people who are reacting vociferously to someone speaking up about their own harm, it's because they have an unhealed relationship with abuse. And so I try whenever possible to keep that in mind. Now I'm still a human being. And so, when you see these smears on, online, or, I was at I gave a speech where Zoran Mamdani, our Democratic nominee, spoke, and I spoke shortly after him. And, there was someone in the audience calling me a liar, and my daughter was there, and he said, "Your mom is a liar." And, as part of that, same part of that, cadre of people who are supporting Andrew Cuomo, and it's kind of who he is. Verbally abuse someone's 11-year-olds just to get to her. So these things really do bother me, but in a way, we are not going to change society if we don't see these things, right? And I am so privileged to have a platform where there are so many people who said, "Hey, that's not right. You can't smear Lindsey that way. This is how I know her." I am very privileged in that way. And so I recognize the responsibility I have to keep fighting. There was even a New York Times article that said his sister was very much coordinating with this group of women to make me and other survivors of Andrew Cuomo afraid to speak up. And that was printed in the New York Times, unbeknownst to me. So it's not just a group of women operating in isolation. They had very much connections to Cuomo, I would suspect directly, at the very least, through his sister, who's heavily been involved with his political efforts. So it's devastating, but it's not, as we all know, that unusual. And so what I try to do is, where possible and where it makes sense, I'm not highlighting people who are smearing or harming me, but I do make an example of occasions where I think a broader community needs to understand what is happening. And I hope that that serves some purpose in turning what is, for me, very traumatic into something different. And Cynthia Nixon has been, she fought Andrew Cuomo running for governor when so many wouldn't. And he really hates women who speak up. He really, when it comes down to it, I try not to think too much about his mentality, but at his core, I think a lot of what his abuse of women is about is power and control. And so, boy, does he hate any woman who challenges that. And Cynthia Nixon is high up on the list. I remember how he couldn't stand knowing when she was on TV, and he had a real problem with her running against him for governor. How dare she, kind of thing. And even though he wasn't sexually harassing her, like he was even the mayor of Syracuse, Stephanie Miner, who's come out and said he forcibly kissed her. He was trying to wield power over her in a different way. And Cynthia and I have collaborated on a few things, and I really admire her because she's always unafraid to speak up. And, the other thing I'd mention is people who abuse their power over women don't, and others don't do it in just one way. They do it in every possible way. And I've heard over the years Cuomo say the most hateful things about the LGBT community, about the Muslim community. And I think, you start to see it. There's been, conversation over the years that he was behind his father's a campaign slogan, vote for Cuomo, not the homo, and these things, these these instances of real hateful behavior have dogged him his entire career because he traffics in hate and abuse. And so I really admire her. I'm a big fan. And any woman or any person who's going to speak up against someone who people are still afraid of him, even though he lost the primary, even though he resigned, they are still afraid of this man. And so I got to give credit to someone like her who continues to speak up.
Absolutely, Lindsay. Thank you. Gwen, I'm gonna pass it over to you, and I know you have some questions for Lindsay, so I'm gonna let you take the floor.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Well, hello, Lindsay. I'm Gwen. I'm one of the co-founders of Rise Above Justice movement. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Listening to you speak, it's so brave. And I kind of want to go back to, uh, talking about coming forward against a very powerful man. At the time, he might have been the most powerful man in the Democratic Party. Um, and one of our friends, Natasha Stoynoff, is a journalist who is one of the Trump survivors.
Oh,
And
wow.
when I was researching you, Lindsay, and looking at articles, I saw a quote that was saying how you believe Andrew Cuomo is someone who mirrors Donald Trump.
Oh, yeah.
And in this time period, um, I remember, so I had family that lived in New York City, so they went through the pandemic there. My parents were very much, watching it every day as we all were. And Andrew
Yes.
Cuomo was kind of I want to say a comfort, and the way
Mhm.
he sold himself
Yes.
made him very popular, and he was popular with my family. So when the
Yes.
allegations came forward, it almost was, I know it was shocking to some people. So can you speak about, and you kind of already have touched on this a little bit, but you know, how how do you persevere when powerful people are pursuing or pushing against you?
Mm.
Because
Mm.
just a couple more quotes. You said this destroyed my life at one point.
Yeah.
Even though you did say I'm more myself now than I ever have been before.
Yeah.
Can you speak a little bit about that and
Sure.
maybe, the heaviness of coming forward, but also what may lie on the other side of that?
Absolutely. And, I like to start off with a lot of people say, he was, when he was governor during COVID, he was, someone that we look to for guidance. And I don't take that away from anyone. I think it was a very scary time. I was myself in lockdown with my family in the city. And I think people needed someone, they needed to hear from someone, and our president Donald Trump was not fitting the bill. So I don't discredit anyone for feeling that way at all. And how would you know the information at the time? Now, now we have more information. As I said earlier, abusers don't just abuse in one way. And I think what we've come to learn is that he was actually abusing the public's trust within COVID as well. I mean, he prevented the mayor of New York City from doing lockdown in a time that would have prevented community spread. He controlled the release of vaccine sites as a power play in New York City against Bill de Blasio. He restricted the various processes that would have been in place to protect people in nursing homes and force them to accept COVID positive patients. He wrote a $5 million book heralding his successes with government time, all these things he did, but that weren't exactly readily available to the public eye. So, he was abusing that power. It wasn't just his abuse of women, but that wasn't widely known to the public. And we desperately, I'm someone who believes in politics, so I believe in the power of having people lead. So I don't fault anyone for viewing him as a source of comfort. Now, I think it's pretty clear beyond his abuse of women, his lies, how similar he is to Donald Trump. And I think if you've been watching the news this week, or for folks who watch or listen to this later, just this week, Trump has been revealed to be trying to, tip the scales in Cuomo's favor in this mayor's race by getting Eric Adams and potentially Curtis Sliwa out of the race. These people, Trump and Cuomo, are so much alike. They both come from Queens. They both come from domineering fathers. They both have a brute force approach to politics and a disrespect for women and anyone less powerful than themselves. So I've been saying that for a long time. I think many people see it, and now it's being proven out on a regular basis how not only how similar they are, but how much they work together. Now, getting to one thing I do really love to talk about, which you mentioned, is kind of how destructive coming forward was and is for survivors, and then what lays after that. It really, I think one way I describe it, and it is good, is I felt like I blew up my life, and all my body blew up, and all the pieces were all over the world for people to be like, dissecting and looking at, like literally pieces of me. That's how it felt emotionally. And that's very graphic, but in a way that's the only way I can describe it. And it was like that. I was at the time running for office. The only reason I didn't quit the race is I didn't want to set a bad example to survivors of quitting. So I stayed in the race, but the race was over. My campaign staff was being intimidated. There were smears all over the place of me. I was, getting calls at my apartment. Photographers were taking photos of me. Just really alarming and scary, even for someone who's been in the public eye. And it's very isolating. A lot of people don't know. It's kind of like a death, in the family. People don't know how to deal with you. And this is not an experience that most people go through. So I think there was such isolation. People didn't reach out. They didn't know what to say. And I didn't know how to deal with it, because there wasn't, like in so many other instances of my personal and professional life, where I could reach out to a mentor and say, how did you deal with this? Because I really couldn't think of anyone who had been through something quite like this. And so there was a period where I felt like everything was over, and I was kind of just waking up to make sure that I could be a decent mom to my daughter. There were months like that, and periods like that. And I like to share that because maybe it will resonate with someone who's listening, because it would be dishonest to not say that it wasn't like that. But at the same time, coming out the other side, there, when I think about what the alternatives were, I wouldn't be me if I didn't stand up at some point and say, this happened, this was real, and it's happening to other women after me. I felt incredibly, in a way, responsible. I mean, the woman who reached out to me, who on DM, I had, how it originally happened was I was on Twitter talking about the worst job I've ever had, and I said Friendly's was more respectful as a waitress, da 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 da. But I didn't say that I was sexually harassed. And then this young woman, reached out to me, basically her first job out of college, and described him sexually harassing her. And I knew she was telling the truth because her story was so similar to mine. And I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, this guy is incredibly powerful, probably the most powerful governor in the country, one of the most powerful people in my party. and he's not stopped sexually harassing women. I knew it was true because he doesn't know how to be appropriate with women. He either is attracted to you or he's not attracted to you, and one way or another, he's going to be abusive about it. If you spend enough time with him. So it was like a volcano. It was going to come out of me one way or another, and it was just one of those moments where I wondered often if I would have the courage in my life to like run into a burning building, which is in a way what it felt like. And I'm not trying to kind of liken myself to someone doing like first responder work. It just emotionally kind of felt like that. And um, I am a person who did that. And I think we need to give credit to ourselves when we do these things. You are a person who stood up and said something about the truth to help others. And I think it's so much the basic level of our humanity, and yet it's so hard to do because of social media, because of the power imbalance, because it's inconvenient, and because social warfare basically is set on you to attack you. And so I it forced me to address so many aspects of my life, relationships. There were a ton of people who didn't reach out, and then when the attorney general's report came out and basically proved all of the things to great detail, way beyond me, I heard from people I'd never heard from, and they said they were with me the whole time. And then when he had to resign, same thing happened. Oh, we were with you the whole time, Lindsey. We didn't reach out, but here we are. And that was kind of like another moment of grief, because you're like, oh, I didn't even realize that this person wasn't like supporting me until they just said they're supporting me for the first time after all of the difficult periods, where I was essentially victorious. And so you have these moments of grief, but afterwards, there is no question about what I value in the world. There's no question about what I would do to protect other women. There's no question about what I'm trying to do to make the world better for my daughter and her generation. And for someone who, I didn't really go into this in the beginning, my mom had my sister at 16, single mom, I was on food stamps, went through the whole process of trying to build her life as a vulnerable teenager and being a mom. Um, I just come from a long line of women who had a lot of challenges in society. And so I had always wanted to get to positions of power to do things different. I got all the right degrees. I got all the right jobs. I did all the right things. I stayed in line. And at the end of the day, it didn't make me any safer from this kind of abuse. And so I had to figure out a different way to fight back. And I did. It wasn't what I expected. I thought, if I get the right job and I'm in power, then things will change because I care about them and because I fight for them. But sometimes it requires you to do the exact opposite, to disrupt it. And, I've always been pretty opinionated, but I did not expect to do that specific thing. And I think in a lot of ways, as time goes on, I feel so much more confidence. Oh my gosh, can you imagine if someone else had spoken up and after all these years, it wasn't me? How would I hold myself accountable if I didn't speak up for all these women who, by the way, were much younger than myself, mostly early in their careers? They were not senior like me. They did not have the privilege that I had. They did not have the platform I had. They did not have the financial privilege to hire good attorneys, which I've had to do in the intervening years. How terrible would I have felt, would I feel, if someone else had done this work? Because eventually it was going to come out. Abuse, it festers until it is revealed. But many times, I think in previous generations, women have thought they had to do it at the end of their lives. I remember reading Cicely Tyson's autobiography, the actress, the great actress. And, she talked about in one of the interviews about it, later in life, speaking up about being raped essentially by an acting coach, I think. And she was crying late in life. I think the guy was already dead. It was no longer someone, the abuser was not in her environment, in her world, did not have the power over her. And it was still harming her so much. And I think there are so many things out there in the world happening. My story and the story of the women against Cuomo who fought up courageously are just one piece of it. Taking the power back in our hands to help make change in hopes that women and survivors writ large, not just women, are not waiting till the end of their lives to tell these harrowing stories, and that we can make change in real time, so we're not so that things change. And so I feel like I very much have a mission. I had to disrupt a lot of my life to do that, but it also, that famous quote, the things that break your heart also help you see better. I know I'm, messing it up, but that really is true in this case. There were a lot of things that broke my heart, but they also helped me see clearly, and also, help me look in the mirror and say, well, I did what I would expect of myself through the hardship. And I think so many women don't get to, so many survivors, excuse me, don't get the opportunity to um, take that as such an accomplishment. And I would really like to be part of making sure other survivors feel that, because they should.
Thank you so much for sharing all this inspiration, Lindsay, and talking about your background. And oftentimes we hear about survivors being preyed upon that are the most vulnerable. And
Yes.
in situations such as yours, where you're in a campaign office, you're working, I would assume, relatively close quarters, but can you talk about why, and these are to be fair too, so Andrew Cuomo in 2018 was endorsed by one of the most powerful women, Hillary Clinton.
Yes.
And then I did see that she didn't say anything in 2021 when your allegations came forward, and he wasn't endorsed by her again. But I don't want to say she stayed silent. She said, it needs to be investigated. Um, in a world where, of course, there's vulnerability, but this is a world of very powerful people. How do you think this was allowed to happen? How long do you believe this was going on? And besides Andrew Cuomo, who is most responsible in your eye, in your opinion,
Sure.
for the abuse that might have been going on longer than, unfortunately, might have been going on longer than you were working for him?
Oh yeah, I absolutely think there's no question. As I mentioned earlier, Andrew Cuomo doesn't know how to be appropriate with women. It just manifests itself in different ways if he for whatever reason finds you attractive. So I think this has been going on to some extent his entire career, and I've heard essentially that. This is kind of, I think, one of the most damning things about this is that no one really was surprised. I don't think a single journalist was surprised. I don't think, maybe they wouldn't say it publicly, I don't think a single politician who's worked in and around state government was surprised. I would be pressed to find a person who was actually surprised. It was pervasive. And he was known as, quote unquote, a womanizer. But I think I'm tired of hearing those kinds of terms, sex pest, womanizer, because it indicates something that is somehow consensual from someone who is an abuser. And this is the most powerful man in the state. I think one of the things that was really revealing that came out in the Attorney General's report and various reporting, is that you could not leave state government at a certain level in his orbit. You would have to hide that you had a job in order to leave. And oftentimes he and his people would find a way to cancel the opportunity. Like, he really controlled the entire system. So there's no way out. I mean, the complete power. This man had complete power. And if he has a genius, I think that is one of it. He figures out how to have complete power over others through fear and, design of his own bureaucracy and scare tactics to do that. So no one was surprised. And I think ultimately within that, there's a certain condemnation of the system as a whole. I certainly, I don't think any of the leaders in either the assembly or the Senate. I know that um, the lieutenant governor at the time, current governor Kathy Hochul, knew he was, really bad with women. That she knew all the stories. I don't know, but I don't think anyone was surprised at how he was harassing women who worked for him. So everyone kind of knew. It's kind of like that story where someone is being victimized and they scream, and everyone thinks someone else is going to call for help, and then no one does. In a way, it's like that, but it's not even that they thought someone else was going to call. It's that they knew that they would be in trouble if they did the call. So I think in some way, our state party enabled him. I think all of the powerful politicians enabled him. I think his powerful donors enabled him. And also, some of those powerful donors were a part of trying to reputation wash him and return him to power. I mean, the idea that Michael Bloomberg gave, I think, $8 million to the PAC supporting him in the primary is just disgusting to me. But again, it's kind of revealing because Michael Bloomberg has dealt with his own sexual harassment issues at Bloomberg itself that came out when he ran for president. For a long time, people perceive it is acceptable for powerful men in politics to harass and abuse women who work for them. That's just a fact. I mean, Andrew Cuomo worked for Bill Clinton. And I know for a fact from stories he would tell on this, the state plane, these gross stories about how Bill Clinton would, touch people to essentially, command primacy, dominance. And, Andrew Cuomo learned that lesson from him. I remember him sharing a story essentially around that. This is a system of abuse of women. And I grew up in that. I was a high school student in Northern Virginia where Bill Clinton was president. The way that they tore down Monica Lewinsky, who was a young intern at the time, just was a total pass for men in power, at the very least to behave badly, and at the very most to abuse their power over women and those less powerful. Now, the piece I didn't tell, I went to Wellesley College, women's college. I went there because I met Hillary Clinton in high school, and I was inspired by her story, becoming a senator, her fight for healthcare for families, and that she was a powerful woman. And I came from a long line of women who I felt had no power over their own destiny. And so when she did not speak up, as someone who I'd admired so much as a hero in childhood. I mean, I think anyone I went to high school with would be like, "Oh, Lindsey, Hillary Clinton, she, such a fan." That was heartbreaking. I, met her a bunch of times. I supported her when she ran for president. I was student body president, like she was at Wellesley College. That kind of thing was heartbreaking, and um, I think maybe she didn't, it's probably a touchy issue for her to speak up about abuse of women in power as politicians because it probably hits too close to home in her own family. But that was one of those painful stories. And I think, fast forward to the primary race for, when Andrew Cuomo was, one of his first events was a Woman for Cuomo event, which was just gross. But luckily, I and a bunch of other women from Working Families and other groups, Harassment Free New York, uh, came and actually protested the event, which felt really good. But there are all these women in power who either look the other way again. My Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, declined to said, "Oh, I guess it's up to voters." This is a person who built basically her entire career in the Senate speaking up about abuse of women in the military, essentially. So and she was very much on the front lines, speaking up about Al Franken. When his abuse, the abuse allegations came forward, and he had to leave the Senate, she was very much involved. And now she's quiet in her own backyard on someone she told to resign. That 3 investigations found that he had done these things. It's so disappointing. At the same time, there were all these people who did speak up, who did join me, who didn't leave me alone. Many from the Working Families Party, both Zoran and Brad Lander and the leading candidates, Zellner Myrie, all these other people spoke up and stood alongside me. So I think there's a lot of blame to go around. And unfortunately, my lifelong party, the Democratic Party in New York State, was very it's still led by someone that Cuomo put into power, Jay Jacobs. So there's a lot of blame to go around. I think there's a lot of responsibility that needs to, they're never going to hold themselves responsible for it, but things need to change. And that'll be enough for me if things change for other women moving forward and other survivors moving forward. It's entire systems. At the end of the day, if my work is to help change this, I'm not really focused on Andrew Cuomo. I'm focused on the entire political system, the media system that fed into his, ridiculous smears. The other politicians who look the other way, the donors who continue to fund him because they think he's better than the alternative. How is abusing people better than any alternative? That's just untenable to me. But there were all these other people who did speak up. And so it was so redeeming. It was so positive for me to be one piece of ensuring that he lost that primary. And it felt great because I got to use the skills that I came with from politics and, messaging with media, collaborating with different community groups and individuals, speaking at rallies, all of the things that I feel are important about my career, I got to dip back in and do. So that was in a way very therapeutic for me. And we won, and we're going to win again. So I don't want to leave people. There's a lot of systems that need to change. And if I think just about my own harm, then I think I'll take away from that. So I focus more on, I don't think I'm ever going to get an apology from a lot of these people. And I don't expect it. What I do expect is for these people to react differently now and for other survivors. And we'll be there if they don't. And we'll hold them accountable, which is, I think, what we're kind of trying to do now.
Lindsay, a lot of survivors that we've talked to, and I know Zachary and I share this ourselves as survivors, it almost feels like we're in a time where not only are we re-empowering ourselves and taking our voices back when they've been stolen from us, but we're coming together and wanting to give back and almost give a voice to those survivors that don't have one, aren't able to use their voice
Yes.
again yet.
Yes.
And I love what you said, what about abuse is better than the alternative? And we've seen this theme. I mean, my gosh, like in the last election for president. And of course, there was 28 women, and we know there's more out there that came
Yes.
forward against our president currently. Um, with that being said, as a survivor, you talked about this isolation. Um, that you experienced, especially like people, not wanting to speak to you after you came out with your story, and even
Yeah.
family members, and we've talked to other survivors where that unfortunately does happen. People you think are close to you don't really speak to you. So, not
Yeah.
everybody, but
Yeah.
it does happen. So with the isolation and feeling at your lowest point in all of this, what advice would you give to a survivor first starting out on their healing journey? You talked about your trauma therapy, just touched on it. And
Yeah.
if you want to kind of speak to that, I think something we
Sure.
also want to highlight on this podcast is the need for mental health resources to be available to every survivor despite income level. That's something, I'm really
Yes.
passionate about because
Yes.
I am also a survivor that, this kind of therapy work has really saved my life. So if you're
Yes.
able to speak on that and give that
Absolutely.
advice to survivors listening, we would love to hear what you have to say.
Absolutely. And one thing, I'm really glad we're talking about that. One thing that another thing that has changed and I've grown as a person from this experience is I'm a politician. So a lot of times what politicians are doing is sharing individual stories that are compelling of other people's stories to impact change, right? So you're highlighting a story of someone that's really hard to see a policy change. And having been essentially the story, I see how much lack of sensitivity, even if it's unintentional, there is in the media. Like just to receive calls and texts, I receive hundreds being like, did he touch you, or and it's like the media reaching to me, and because they all had my number because I was a politician. So I would get the most triggering texts, calls, and these are from the media to deal with. I would be asked in totally unrelated situations to relive my trauma in a policy conversation, and it was incredibly triggering. It was not at all trauma informed. I don't even think the idea of trauma informed is something that is common in politics. But you know what it did? It made me that much more aware how sensitive we have to be in sharing stories of survivors, in sharing stories of grief, and whatever the reason is, even if it's to help. So much more sensitivity is required in how we approach people in trauma. And so that is a gift that I feel really privileged to have learned in a personal way, because I'm in politics, and I'm not saying I'm always going to get it right, but I will never be ignorant to being on the receiving end of that, even if someone's goal is to help. So there's that. Now, something else about politics that I've been passionate about, and again, another, because I want to highlight positive things. One of my main planks in various jobs and in running for office that I've always had is around mental health accessibility, because I come from a family, as I've mentioned, of a lot of trauma for women and a lot of mental illness, and those things are obviously interconnected. And so I was always fighting to talk about mental illness and mental health and accessibility, because mental health and physical health are equally important, but only one is even talked about and funded as essential, right? So this is a great opportunity for me. I've always been someone who's been using therapy, because I think it's important to have a sounding board on life. You know, for me, on parenting, making sure I'm a good mom, even though all the moms who came before me had challenges. I think every single woman except for my mom, including all the women that I grew up with, lost custody of their kids for various reasons. So I knew that I was going to have a journey in therapy to make sure I could be a good mom and always reflecting and growing, to have that good examples that I didn't always see at home. So I've always believed in it. But then my therapist in the middle of all this said, you know, I really think that you need trauma therapy, because this is just on a scale of trauma that is not, you know, we're not dealing with it alone in talk therapy. So it really changed my life to go to trauma therapy. I've been now doing it for a number of years. I did have to pause with some of the legal battles that Cuomo is continuing to put me in, even though I'm not suing him, because sometimes when I would say, if you get in trauma therapy, if you're in the middle of a moment of trauma, for some, it is not a good idea to be investigating these things. So there has been a pause, but on the whole, trauma therapy has helped me fit into my life again. You know, it would be at a certain moment in time, just to give you an example, I would see someone that I was talking to, a family member, a friend, look at their phone to read the news, and I would be triggered thinking that there was some insane story or smear about me in the news, just by someone looking at their phone to read the news. I mean, that's sad, right? I feel bad for myself. And that's a sign that I've been doing trauma therapy. That's sad to have a trigger response every time someone you're with looks at their phone at the news, because you're like, is there some terrible new event that Cuomo has done? Is there some terrible way that he's smearing me? Is there some terrible new power that he's gotten over me and other women? And I have really had to address that in trauma therapy. And there are various ways that they're able to approach these trigger responses and unpack how these stories connect to both traumatic events and maybe previous trauma in your life. Because, you know, sometimes, as we mentioned earlier, abusers choose vulnerable people for a reason. I think in a way that I was vulnerable because, while I was not junior in my first job, I so wanted to um, do my best and to achieve so I could be a part of change, that I felt like it was my job to accept abuse for years. I felt like I, maybe I deserved it. Maybe I was, that was part of the test. If I could help change the world, was putting up with abuse. And I learned through trauma therapy how sad and wrong that is, but it's not that uncommon. And it took me assessing and being able to pick apart these moments in trauma therapy and connecting them to early stories I told myself for survival. I mean, there's a lot of maladaptive things we tell ourselves that have a role and to play in our lives. And trauma therapy helps us unwork those and look at them and be curious about them. And so I am such a believer in that. And it is sad. I've spent a fortune in trauma therapy. It is sad how inaccessible it is. And I think if there, we see all these Senate House hearings about all the terrible things, in my view, RFK is doing to the CDC and beyond and health. We're not even talking about the epidemic of mental illness in this country and all of the inputs of it and how much better every single policy issue, every single problem we have in this country would be if mental health care was truly accessible. And on top of that, and within that, trauma therapy was demystified and very accessible. I can't tell you how many people I've said, here's my trauma therapist. Here's the types of things we work on. I think it would help you in as you process your divorce, as you process the loss of a loved one. So many things are traumatic, and it is a part of life to experience them. Why do we not have a commonly held belief that it is a part of life to help process them and metabolize the grief and metabolize the trauma? I am such a believer, and it is totally inaccessible. So I'm saying it's like I'm painting a beautiful painting, a beautiful picture of something that we would all love, and then I tell you it's priceless. And that's not right. And so, I don't have an exact answer for that, but I think if any politician is trying to get your vote for anything and they're not talking about accessible mental health care, they're missing the game. So that's what I would say about that.
Lindsay, thank you, for being, telling your story so candidly. And, I know a lot of our mutual followers are going to be really excited that we're doing this podcast with you. They're going to be super excited to
I
learn
love it.
about it. And, I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about the article that you wrote for the Independent,
Yes.
and it's titled Why I Joined the DSA.
Yes.
As a member of the DSA myself, I have found a sense of community. I found a sense of belonging, and, it feels like they're truly doing the work, which, Zoran is a DSA candidate, and I'm
Yes.
deeply excited, and watching the Working Families Party, like, take over city council seats. It's so incredible because the working and the poor are finally at front and center. And
Yes.
in this capitalistic hell that we're just stuck in, and this trickle in the stuck in these trickle down economics. You mentioned that you walked into on July 14th, the mayor's race debrief was the first big DSA event you attended.
Yes.
You were welcomed by name with genuine warmth, something rare in political spaces. Can you talk a little bit about what it was like to experience that versus
Yeah.
what you've experienced with the New York Democratic Party? Because obviously
Yeah.
this is a whole different shift and everything, and I know you've been working alongside, trying to spread awareness about what Zohran Mamdani is doing, which he's personally my favorite candidate. I wish I had a candidate like that here because I would obviously uplift and support and, go door knock. I hate door knocking with a passion. I also
Yeah.
hate making phone calls. However, I would do it if I had somebody like him because somebody like Zohran would fight like hell for people like my mom who is a
Yes.
cancer, going through cancer treatments. He would fight for
Ugh.
her Medicaid, fight for her housing, fight for,
Yes.
transit, and fight for all of these deeply important necessities.
Yes.
And we're stuck in like this whole hellscape where politicians are bought out by APAC. Politicians are bought out by
Yes.
big time corporations and funnel money, which, Andrew Cuomo, he's obviously a big APAC candidate. He
Yes.
refuses to call out a genocide. He refuses to, address a lot of the wrongdoings like he's done. And there's been like an astronomical route. We have like a whole rap sheet, right?
Oh
But
yeah.
talk to us about what it was like walking into that event. Like you said, that was the first big DSA event. What
Yeah.
what led you to joining the DSA?
Yeah.
Because I'm in big support. I'm a card carrying member myself of the DSA.
Yes.
I carry it in my wallet. I'm not ashamed by it because I found a sense of community that I did not find within the Democratic Party. Do not get me wrong. There are good candidates, there are good elected officials within the Democratic Party. We see that with people like Rashida Tlaib. We see that with people like Summer Lee. We see that with people like Jasmine Crockett. We see that with people like Ilhan Omar and Gretchen Whitmer is another good one, right?
Yes.
We see that, but walking into a DSA event is totally different. Can you
Yeah.
explain why it was different for you?
Absolutely. I am a lifelong Democrat. I come from Democrats. I think my parents would have a heart attack if I was like waking up and becoming a Republican. But so that's like my orientation. So my stance was to always be in this party. I think, as I've mentioned, it was a real shock to be kind of so maligned for a period of time. I mean, I think there's been a revision on that, and I'm happy to say that a lot of what I said, all of what I said and others said, has been proven to be true, and I think people see that now. But I am inconvenient for the leaders because they looked the other way with Andrew Cuomo. So Jay Jacobs was a supporter of Andrew Cuomo. um, Even Kathy Hochul, all of these political figures in my party, in the state, in the city, it is inconvenient for survivors of their most powerful leader to continue to speak out and to continue to be. And so you're constantly kind of pushing against that. And I think any survivor will understand that story, whether we're talking about politics or anything else. And of course, being me, I do. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not doing it for them. I'm doing it for other people, and I'm doing it for other survivors. So, but that feeling is something, it's changing a bit now, but that was present for a lot of my time. And then when Andrew Cuomo, I knew he was going to try to claw back to power, and so I'd had a piece ready for Vanity Fair the day he announced, and it went out. But I was trying to look for who are the helpers, who is going to help me prevent this man from coming back to power. I didn't find it from any of the people in my party. I found it in disparate circles of different groups of people and individuals saying, "Oh, we're going to fight with you. Let's do this." And you know what I realized? It was not intentional. A good half the people that I came to organize with daily over the next coming months for events, for protests, for everything, are members of DSA. And it kept happening. It kept happening that I would show up to an event and the first people there to help were members of DSA. They weren't announcing it. They weren't saying, "I'm DSA Lindsey." They were just saying, "Lindsey, I love what you're doing. I love what you're trying to do. Here's what I'm trying to do. Let's work together." And it kept happening over and over again through the primary. And it is still the case that all these Hakeem Jeffries won't speak out against Cuomo. Chuck Schumer wouldn't speak out against Cuomo. Kirsten Gillibrand wouldn't speak out against Cuomo. All of these people who are extremely powerful were being silent. And then I kept having these individuals who were involved with people who were involved with the fight right alongside me, putting themselves on the line, and they kept being members of DSA. And then, as I learned more and more, and I got really invested in what Zoran was doing and saying, and I was really supportive of him. For him to be able to walk this line, he's in the Democratic primary, so he's a Democrat, but he's leading with values and positions that he got through DSA. I loved that. And I loved what he was doing, and it spoke to me, and it speaks to me. And so I started, and I had a former field director of mine from one of my campaigns. He's a member of DSA, and he and I were together on the primary day, doing some poll visibility, and he said, "You should check this out." It was kind of like I was being welcomed again and again and again, and it was so refreshing to genuinely be welcomed for being the outspoken person that I am. I thought that's what politics was always going to be like. If you speak up and you do the right thing and you fight for other people, isn't that what would be welcoming? And it wasn't like that in my party. It was the opposite. And I was finding increasingly that's exactly what I was welcomed for in DSA. And so I knew I wanted to explore. I joined, and then there was this big event. And how do you pack on a summer evening? It's torrentially raining, it's downpour, and it's a church in Brooklyn in the summer at night, torrential downpour, packed to the brim with people. I've never seen a political meeting like that in my time in New York City politics, ever. And not only have I not seen something like that, but it also wouldn't be welcome. Most of the establishment Democrats don't want people there because they want to control the outcome. They actually don't want people to vote in primaries because they want to hold their seats safely. That's why they set up voting booth, they set up polling sites in ways that advantage the existing, leaders and all of that. So to show up, to be so welcome, like I thought I had this impression that I was genuinely being welcomed, and it was like I was behind a big column because there was no spaces to sit. That's how common it was. Everyone presented in the various committees on the work they did. It was so refreshing how transparent it was. They allowed people to ask questions at the end. I asked a question, I don't remember what it was about, and I got a bunch of text messages saying, "Lindsey, are you there? Is that you, Lindsey?" It was just such a welcoming shift. And the substance of what was being discussed, I agreed with completely too. So it wasn't even just that I was being welcomed for who I am. And it was this confluence of, you can be who you are. I agree with this message. I agree with this fight. We've won and we're going to win again. And so it just such a great feeling that has been so contrary, not just to my experience in New York City, but I think most Democrats and, people's experience of politics in our country writ large. It's not like this. And it's exciting for that reason.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also, this will be my next question to you. So yesterday, or I believe it was yesterday, or it was like a couple of days ago, but Congressman Jerry Nadler stated that he would not be running or seeking re-election in
Yes.
2026. I think that paves a way for more candidates like Zoran just on
Yes.
the national stage. You know what I mean?
Yes, I
And I,
agree.
I think people are starting to realize that the establishment is not our friends. And
Yes.
because, like you said, Hakeem Jeffries refuses to endorse Zoran Mamdani, and historically he's taken a lot of APAC money. Um, at first I was like, oh, yeah, I kind of get it. But now I'm thinking like, we all need to be like Zoran. We
Yes.
all need to, campaign on these issues and actually listen to our constituents for once. I
Yes.
mean, they are elected to be a representative, but who exactly are you representing by taking, these big time dollars? Because you're not listening to your constituents. You're not paying attention to the issues that are actually within your communities and what you represent and in your district. And whenever you don't do that, you deserve to be primaried. And,
Yes.
I mean, I think with Jerry's announcement, I'm not going to lie, there are some things that he has been very good on. There's been some things that he's been very horrific on.
Yes.
Overall, he's another career politician that, he does need to step aside and let more progressive leaders, step into that spot. And the same can be said about a lot of other congressional members. And speaking of which, you ran for office.
I did.
And do you want to talk about your experience a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think in a way it was a great dry run for coming forward because there was so much hostility. I would go to, and I ran. So now the district that Congressman Nadler has is the makeup is very different through redistricting. It used to be just the west side of Manhattan, lower Manhattan, and parts of Brooklyn. Now it is the Upper West Side, Midtown West, and then the Upper East Side and Midtown East. So the East Side has been added. Um, so it is a bit different, but I ran in that race. This was kind of in following AOC and so many others of really challenging the establishment for their lack of productivity, for their, my perception and many others, lack of fight. I do think he's made some good choices over the intervening years. I think in many ways because he was challenged. I think it's healthy to challenge our leaders. I didn't win. It was a great experience to learn how to be a candidate because I had so long been, working for a principal, the candidate or the politician, Andrew Cuomo, others. And so I learned a lot about that. But one of the biggest things I learned was that you are not wanted. You are not there's a tremendous amount of hostility. I would go to events and, the old kind of guard political clubs would like scream me down at events. And I think the climate has changed a fair amount. But that experience in some ways was helpful to have a thick skin for when I came forward because I wasn't exactly surprised about being attacked for reasons that have like nothing to do with me. So that was a good experience in that way. It wasn't a fun experience, but you learn about the fundraising process, you learn how to do debates, all these things that as like the lead policy person and an administrator for a politician, you just don't have that experience. And at the end of the day, running for office is a very different thing. And what I loved most was meeting people. But unfortunately, this was right in the middle of COVID. So we went into lockdown. So the part that I probably would have been really good at, we didn't get to do a lot. But it was a great learning experience. And so I don't regret at all doing it, even though I didn't win. I was surprised that he chose to retire when he did. I think to Zoran's credit, I think it has a lot to do with seeing the sea change of voters. Like the number of young people who voted in this election, 45 and under, is like uncompared. There's no comparison to anything we've seen in New York City history. So there is a huge shift, and I think for all of the complicated views I might have about his policies, Jerry Nadler is a smart person, and I think this was a good leadership example to set. I think that district is going to be very complicated because it's probably the most important district in the country in terms of, um, you know, uh, predominantly Jewish district, and there's a lot of back and forth about how people feel about Israel and the war in Gaza. I think there's going to be a lot of money flooding into this race. And I think it's very important for those of us who want to see a policy shift by the United States in, stopping support for Israel's atrocities in Gaza to get engaged because much more pro-Israel forces are definitely going to get engaged in this race. And I think it's telling that one of the last things, and in his comments on his deciding not to run again, Jerry Nadler has made is that he would support stopping arms sales and support for Israel, which is angered a lot of people in his district who are traditional liberals, but on the issue of Israel, much more, I would say, conservative. So he made that statement. Um, and I think the question is, what kind of leader are we going to get in that district? And I think everyone who cares about ending the genocide in Gaza, this is one of probably a handful of races that they need to get engaged in.
Lindsay, thank you so much. As a survivor, everything you've said gives me hope. Of course, it's painful to hear these things. It's painful to hear how common these stories are, but having people like you come forward is going to give a lot of hope and inspiration, not only to me, but survivors everywhere. So thank you.
Thank
I'm
you.
not a politician, but I am a musician, and politics in the music industry pretty much operates the same way.
Yes,
It's all about, oh, we want the most authentic person to be in office or the most authentic artist to be, on the charts, whatever it is, however you measure success. But, it's really not that way. There's all these or gatekeepers and
yes,
people you have to appease to. And I firsthand, kind of felt that way when I wrote Barefoot and Pregnant and became
yes.
openly pro-choice in country music. And, as many doors opened with that, I also had a lot of doors close on me.
I believe it.
So I feel your story. Like I
That
said,
is
even though
so
I'm not.
important that you did that. So important.
Yeah, and it's just like it's so important that you spoke up against this very powerful person. And I think that that is like just shows how you're a trailblazer in what you did. You were the first survivor to speak out against him. And I think it's really important people really understand how brave that is. So By the way, side note, what high school did you go to? Because I grew up in Northern Virginia too.
I went to Robinson. Do
I
you
went
know?
to yes, I went to Annandale High School, and
Oh
I
my
did
gosh, right down the
yeah.
right down the road. That's so
Yes,
crazy.
I did an arts program, Institute for the Arts at Robinson. So yeah,
Oh my
that's
God.
wild. Yeah, small world.
It really is. I mean, they're great schools. I mean, because I'm originally from Southern California. My dad was in the military, and then we moved there. I had a really hard time adjusting, but I had great
Yeah,
classes, and it helped me get into college. So I'll never not appreciate that.
yeah. I understand, and that's so cool. What a small world.
Yeah.
Um, for my final question for you, Lindsay, again, I want to go back to what you said about how coming forward destroyed my life at one point, but I'm more myself than I ever have been. I think as survivors, telling our truth for the first time, does feel like a weight lifted. It feels lighter. Of course, it comes with all these other emotions, of course, as well, but with that being said, as a survivor, um, maybe if you could just kind of talk about why you think survivors are having this moment now, as we've seen with, the Epstein survivors coming forward in their big press conference that actually just happened yesterday,
Yes.
and more survivors coming forward against these big, powerful people. Where do you hope it leads? And if you even want to talk about how, you just talked about how supportive you are of Zohran Mamdani's campaign and have been working to get him elected. What inspires you about that campaign? And
Yes.
what do you think he will do not only for the people of New York City, but for survivors?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think it's a very exciting time. When I saw, of course, what survivors of Epstein's disgusting abuses and all of the abusive, powerful people he brought in, all of their abuses, what they did is, I can't personally speak to having had that experience. It's different, but I want to say that every time a survivor speaks up, they help all of us. It is a network effect. And over the years, I've gotten to know a few of Epstein survivors. I've gotten to know survivors of other powerful men in this case, because it really is that I know of. I know it's not exclusively men, but many. We are in community with each other. And I feel like when one of us speaks up, things have progressed for all of us. Because, I mean, yesterday they had supposedly, military exercises that were drowning out the survivors. There was, barriers to women getting to speak at this press conference. All of these things that people are trying to do to silence, powerful men like Trump are trying to do to silence these women is not working, and it's being covered by the media, and everyone I think is watching that. I've seen it everywhere being like, good for them. Like, I think there is more and more support building for us as a society, expecting and wanting survivors to speak out. I don't think we can say the same 10 to 15 years ago. We were shamed into silence, you know and I think that's drastically changing very quickly. We see survivors having other goals after being survivors. Like, this isn't the end all be all of what they want to be and what they want to be known as and what they want to do. They all have their, aspirations and ambition, and they have other things they want to do. And they're speaking about their harm in a way that helps others. All of these things are changing society as we speak. I really believe that. Though that press conference, the outcome I had with the Attorney General's report, the fight preventing Cuomo from getting back into office in the primary and him losing, none of these things would have happened 15 years ago. I really believe that. So that is a real change. And there is no case where a survivor speaks up and it doesn't help everyone. It always helps all of us. And we can all cheer each other on. It's a huge team and we are all on it. I don't think I try very much to build those relationships and to cheerlead other survivors when I see them doing something, even if it's just on social media and I've never met them, maybe I'll never meet them. I want them to see that support. And it's not just all of us who have been very public who are doing that. I feel it all the time. And in a way, what a gift in my life to go into every room that I go into and have people already expect me to speak the truth about my own experience and to be courageous in how I speak about others. What a gift in my life, ultimately, after having that period of, my life feeling destroyed. What a gift to walk into any room I go into now and the expectation about me be that I'm gonna speak up and I'm going to try to help others. What a gift for me, right? That is a great turn of events. And I don't know that I would have expected it to turn out this way. And I don't think it would have without the Me Too movement, without Tarana Burke, without all of these people who have spoken up and continue to do so, without each of you. Like, we're all doing this and it has a network effect. So I'm very excited about that. And I don't even know what the other part of your question was. I'm sorry. I got so animated by that.
Oh, no problem. And I kind of asked you a double question. So,
Yeah.
yeah, what do how do you feel Zoran Mamdani,
Oh,
his
yes.
campaign has inspired you, it's invigorated you to get out there and campaign for him? And also, what do you believe, he'll do and bring for the what do you believe, sorry. What do you
Yeah.
believe he will do for the people of New York City, and especially what he will do for survivors?
Yeah. Well, I think on a basic level, anytime you have someone who is disrupting the power structure and the expectation and not waiting in line, it's helping the most vulnerable. So right now, everyone is trying to figure out how much power they have from their old world in a world in which Zoran Mamdani is the mayor of New York. And they're either finding a way to support him, who is bringing a whole new generation of people with him, a whole new group of people to lead all of these different agencies when he wins. Is the mere fact of this disruption is hugely important for survivors because it is powerful people who take it who are the abusers are powerful people who are taking advantage of others and then silencing them. And even people who are not abusers themselves are very comfortable in systems where people are silenced. So anytime on a basic level that you have someone like Zoran who's just disrupting the entire system, it is good for all of us, especially the most vulnerable. So that is so important. I also think, the confluence of dark money in politics, Citizens United coming to bear, technology companies, AI, all of these things where you have an overwhelming amount of power in a small number of hands, mostly older white men, is cisgender older white men is not good for our most vulnerable. It's silencing so many people. Elon Musk, what he's able to do, how he's has abused his power, destroying entire agencies because he can, because he's the most wealthy person on the planet. The stories we'll never hear probably about his, that we have heard bits and pieces of about his disrespect for women, for example. Um, Anytime you have someone beating that system of money and power and politics, it's good for all of us. And not only is Zoran doing that, but he's saying we're going to tax the rich so that we can accomplish our goals. Now, he's not just saying we're going to do an incremental increase in tax of our wealthiest to change things. He's saying, here's how we're going to change them. We're going to make our bus system free, which again, advantages our most vulnerable. Because our subway system, for those who are not familiar with New York, is the infrastructure is so aged, a huge percentage, a majority of our subway stations are inaccessible with strollers or with wheelchairs. So more often than not, our bus system is how people with the most needs get around our city. And so to make that free, in part through taxing our wealthiest, we have something like, I think, what is it, several hundred thousand millionaires in New York City. So it's not as if we have a dearth of extremely wealthy people to not support this. You're making things more accessible. So the free bus system, I think, is so important. focusing on housing, which is probably the biggest issue we have in the city. That is how people are feeling the pain points economically. Like, you just can't stay here. You cannot start a life here easily unless you have parents or a loved one who has money. So for him to start and lead with not just a rent freeze for rent stabilized apartments, but also talk about building and not have ties to all of beholden ties to all of the real estate community, again, is huge. Both Cuomo and Adams have been basically backed by the real estate community, and they're going to do exactly what they're told, which is not likely, because it hasn't worked already, to shift the the issue of affordability for people to stay here. So whether we're talking about free busing, housing, we're talking about universal childcare, which is something that will just build off of an already successful system we have with universal pre-K. We need these things, and they're going to advantage working families, and they're going to advantage people who have disabilities, who have um, who are not our wealthiest. And isn't that the entire point of government? To enable the most vulnerable to succeed, because if our most vulnerable succeed, people who have the most needs succeed, everyone succeeds. And that is simply not how our city government has been designed to now. And so Zoran is going to do that. And he's exemplifying it by his run, because he's not part of that institutional group that has been funded by a narrow band of billionaires who have politicians do what they're told. So just by virtue of what he's doing and what he's talking about and who he's bringing to the table, it's a huge shift.
Lindsay, thank you so much. And Gwen, thank you so much as well for coming onto the podcast today. We are
Of
going to
course.
wrap up, but Lindsay, I just have one final thing.
Sure.
And if you could do anything to help somebody in this very moment, and this can look like, what would you do? I'm trying to think of the best way to word this, because there's a lot of ways that this can kind of go. But if there's
Hmm.
one policy or one thing that you could do to help somebody who's going through, something similar to
Yes.
what you experienced, or what, a survivor experiences, like sexual assault, domestic violence, gun violence, what would it be? What would you tell them?
I would want, you know how we do wraparound services for like and we should do them more effectively, wraparound services for people experiencing homelessness, so social services and the like. We need a wraparound service for survivors who are dealing with building their life and either coming forward or just trying to rebuild their lives. So whether we're talking about the fact that you cannot afford a lawyer unless you're the wealthy abuser, or we're talking about how abusers have access to press and media and PR to destroy you, or we're talking about good mental health care, that all of three of those things, legal, PR, and mental health care, are simply not accessible for most survivors. And so if I could change one thing, it would be to actually have either a fund or resources that would do these three things for survivors, because that's the only way we're going to change society. Not only to help survivors recover, and to move forward with their lives, but to actually make that possible. Because right now, there's literally nothing that helps them. The abusers, they're either wealthy or, like Andrew Cuomo, he's getting to access taxpayer money, and all of the women he abused have to hire their own attorneys. None of our legal bills are paid. None of our mental health services are paid. And then we're still having to fight the PR battle against someone who just wants to smear us every day. So those three things, I would either from a policy standpoint or from like a nonprofit standpoint want to start an entity or a policy that actually gives money to survivors in this way, for these three things, because it just is how we're going to change the world. We need women and survivors to be able to fight these battles, and currently only the most privileged are able to do that, and I would count myself among that.
Absolutely. Again, Lindsay, thank you so much for coming on to the Rise Above Justice Movement podcast. Um, be sure to spread the word as well. We're building
Absolutely.
this platform. The goal of this podcast is not to just sit and have conversations. The goal of this podcast is to raise awareness about things that are going on in our country, also around the world, because we're not just talking to United States survivors, we're also talking to Canada. We're also talking to
Amazing.
Australia. We're talking, international about the issues that are, our world is facing, right? And there's so many things going on in the headlines. But something that is lacking from the headlines is those authentic and true stories of survivors, because mainstream media, continues to filter and water down our stories and silence our
Absolutely.
voices. So the goal of our podcast is to give that platform to those who do not currently have one, or they're coming forward for the first time. As during the Epstein survivors press conference yesterday, on September 3rd, there was a brand new survivor that told her story for the very first time publicly during a press conference. That takes the amount of courage that takes,
It's
the amount
huge.
of admiration that I have towards Marina, is what her name is. And she shared a story last night on, I believe it was on ABC or one of the other news channels, but she was talking about whenever she told her daughter about what she experienced and what she faced, and like that, I'm taken back by a
Yes.
lot of what she said. And while these are really tough subjects to talk about, I feel like they're deeply important because nobody else is talking about it, and if we can't rely on the mainstream media, who else are we going to rely on? And I always say that
Yes.
content creators and advocates and survivor-led organizations, survivor-led movements like the Rise of Justice movement, shameless plug, but it takes a lot of courage to come forward against somebody who's deeply powerful, that has more resources, that has the utmost amount of privilege. And you came out against Andrew Cuomo, right? And like you said, one of the most influential person in New York politics, and potentially across the country too, because there's a lot of other people that look up to him. I live here in Kansas City, and there's a lot of people that kind of like align directly with his belief, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
I know Gwen in Nashville, Gwen can say the exact same thing. And, Gwen, chime in here in a second. But I think,
Oh yeah, Marsha Blackburn, all of them.
mhm,
Oh yeah.
They need to go.
yeah, absolutely.
Seriously.
And I think about just the current state, and I think about, you can't help but read these headlines, and the content for content creators essentially creates itself these days. I've come to realize that as a content creator myself. I'm new into like the actual content creation side of it, but I'm not new to understanding what's going on, like the policy side of it and the politics side of it. I'm used to that. I've been in this for 16 years, and I'm not slowing down anytime soon. But
Absolutely.
Lindsey, thank you so much. We greatly appreciate you, and we are so excited. This will be one of like many conversations, I'm sure. Um, but other than that, I think we can go ahead and wrap up the conversation.
I love
And
it.
we will obviously welcome you back anytime you have anything to share. And for those who are listening, you can follow Lindsey on social media and continue to subscribe to the Rise of Justice Movement podcast. And with that, my name is Zachary Mallory. I am the founder of the Rise of Justice Movement and the podcast host of the Rise of Justice Movement, the podcast. And Gwen, thank you so much, as always, for being my right-hand person. You have inspired this entire movement. You have continued to uplift and support survivor voices and the most marginalized and most oppressed. And I cannot be more grateful for you. Thank you so much.
Right
And
back at you. And thank you so much, Lindsey.
Thank you both. I really enjoyed that. And it's so good to be in conversation with people who know exactly everything I'm talking about and are so thoughtful. So thank you both so much for all the work you do.
absolutely. Thank you so much, Lindsey. You have a great day, okay?
You too. Talk soon.